They came without warning, not with emissaries or questions or even arrogance, but with precision strikes wrapped in silence orbit, to surface rail fire, atmospheric fragmentation bombs, kinetic rods from their dark, thrumming cruisers that painted Earth's cities with sudden extinction, and for 3 days humanity did not speak back. London fell in the first hour. Kinshasa evaporated beneath a tremor in spacetime. Tokyo was pulled sideways into a distortion field that erased its center and left only concentric rings of ash. The invaders thought they were teaching a lesson. They thought they were making a statement, one scrawled in blood and glass across the cradle of a species they deemed primitive, fractured, too sentimental to fight back. But they did not know what Earth had buried. They did not understand that silence on this planet does not mean surrender. It means remembering. It means counting. It means something far older than vengeance taking its first deep breath. For thousands of years, humanity had imagined this moment not with certainty, but with fear and fascination. First contact, but contact, it turned out, was not the word. This was execution, declaration. A one-sided slaughter authored by a coalition of empires that had drifted for centuries in cold, sovereign detachment across a galaxy they believed they owned. And Earth, glowing blue and green in their war maps, was just one more failed species on a dead end world, a test site for weapons they had not yet perfected. So, when the first alien fleet broke orbit over Earth and demanded nothing, explained nothing, offered no translation or ultimatum, just the silence of open comms and targeting lasers, they assumed it would be over in hours. But the war they chose was not the war they would fight, because deep beneath Antarctica's dry valleys, behind a vault sealed by codes no living government remembered, something old began to wake. Something built not in hatred, but in desperation by human hands, for human survival in the final days of a war Earth had erased from its own history, a failsafe, a last memory, an intelligence too dangerous to live among the living. No one on Earth gave the order, that was the design. No generals, no presidents, no survivors needed to authorize the response. It began with a heartbeat, faint, mechanical, almost hesitant, and then the vault groaned open. They called it Oblivion Protocol, but the machine beneath the ice did not call itself anything. It had no name, only purpose. It watched, silently, as Earth's skies burned. It listened to the final transmissions of dying cities, and for 72 hours it calculated probabilities. It compared this invasion to everything humanity had done to itself, and it decided this was familiar, this was not new, this was not worse than the siege of Lagos, not crueler than the orbital firestorms over the Amazon wastes, not darker than what humans had once done to each other in their own civil collapse. In fact, the machine thought, this was strangely kind, inefficient. It had seen humans do worse and survive, so it reached out not to governments, because there were none left but to the old networks, the buried code, the silent satellites drifting above the Earth like rusting ghosts. And far below the surface, in places no map acknowledged, forgotten systems powered on, biometric chambers checked for genetic locks that had not been touched in centuries, and slowly, one by one, the sleepers began to stir. They were not soldiers, not exactly. They were not clones, not exactly. They were something else, something Earth had built during its own final war, the war before peace, the war before forgetting and then sealed away, afraid of what it had made. They did not speak when they woke. They did not ask questions. They remembered their orders, but while the machine worked and the buried ones stirred, The rest of Earth watched. From bunkers, from ruined hospitals, from fractured subway lines buried beneath rubble, humans stared at the sky and waited for the next wave of death. But something strange happened. After the third day, the alien fleet stopped firing. They hovered, they scanned, they paused, and across 1,000 sensors tuned to Earth's radiation, magnetic pulse, and infrared signature, they saw something shifting, something changing. The planet beneath them, once chaotic and teeming, had gone still. Entire continents had gone dark, not from destruction, but from intention. No broadcasts, no movement, only silence, and that silence was not tactical. It was emotional, because Earth had seen this before. In orbit, the aliens tried again, probes, drones, landers, but nothing came back. The drones vanished, the probes went offline, the landers were absorbed into something that gave no data, and then at 04:17 UTC on the fourth day, one signal rose from the Indian Ocean. A single transmission broadcast on an ancient human frequency, 447, 9 megahertz. It carried no words, just a pattern, 3 tones, 2 pulses, a pause. Then it repeated again, until somewhere aboard one of the alien ships, a translator noticed something horrifying. It was the rhythm of a human heartbeat, not alive, not current, but recorded, ancient, slowed down, one child, one breath, the first human to die in orbit, a memorial repeated forever. Panic swept through the alien fleet, not because of what the signal said, but because it meant they had made a mistake. They had expected a fight. They had expected fire, but Earth was not fighting. Earth was watching, and Earth was remembering, because somewhere in the shadows of the ruins a woman was standing, alone, unarmed, unnamed. She did not cry. She did not scream, but she had buried her son in the first strike, and now the planet whispered to her. The machine beneath the ice knew her face. The systems coming online across the planet aligned to her DNA. She had no memory, but the Earth remembered her. It remembered everything, and for the first time since the invasion began, the sky began to whisper back. It began not with fire, but with breath stale, cold, filtered through 9 layers of carbon and silence, as if the world itself exhaled through lungs that had not moved in centuries. Somewhere beneath what used to be the Himachal ranges, deep below the crust where the bones of ancient mountains sleep, a chamber opened without a sound, and in that perfect dark, someone remembered being human. She did not know her name, she did not know the date, but her fingers curled against metal like they had once curled around a child's hand, and her eyes, when they opened, reflected no light at all, just memory. Around her, the walls pulsed with recognition, not warmth, not welcome, but alignment, as if the planet had been waiting, breath held in grief for her. The protocols had activated 27 minutes ago. The vault's core logic had passed through 63,000 potential candidates for command access, but only one genetic pattern matched, not military, not political. She was not a soldier, but she had permission. Authorization, eco-origin. The AI recognized her before she recognized herself, and the systems, long dormant and haunted by the ghosts of a forgotten war, obeyed without question. Even the buried ones, those locked in cryogenic lattice under the salt mines of Bolivia, under the abandoned bunkers of central Siberia, and in orbiting caskets disguised as satellites, responded to her presence. Systems lit in her wake. Wakefulness followed her breath. and the machines began to sing again. Above ground, the world remained broken. Oceans boiled at the edges of impact craters. The air shimmered with electromagnetic scars. Satellites fell like dead birds, but beneath it all, the rhythm of Earth's retaliation pulsed without panic. It was not rage, it was something colder, something older, a deliberate reclaiming of power too dangerous to use and too cruel to forget. The woman moved through the ruins of an underground rail corridor, her bare feet silent against the dust. Screens flickered to life as she passed, not all at once, as if each one had to decide to remember her. She did not flinch. She had walked this place before, though no part of her body recalled it. But the machines remembered. They played images in the corner of her vision, her own face, younger, screaming through flame. A child's laughter, a weapon misfiring, a planet burning. She reached the end of the tunnel where the light turned red. Not emergency red, but ceremonial blood. Hued, coded for one protocol only, the wall opened to reveal a sarcophagus not of stone but of petrified alloy. Inside lay a man who looked like he had never been born more sculpture than flesh. The system called him Unit 0, but the woman's breath caught as if her lungs knew a different name. She did not speak it, could not, but her hand touched the casing, and for a moment nothing moved. Then a single line of ancient text crawled across the floor, memory confirmed, authority restored, execution pending. In orbit, the invaders watched in confusion. Earth's skies had stabilized, no counterattack, no signal, just the repeating heartbeat, broadcast now across the entire EM spectrum. They sent a recon vessel toward the southern pole, still curious, perhaps even concerned, but not afraid. Not yet. The ship reached the upper thermosphere. It did not return. Its telemetry showed a perfect descent, flawless instrumentation, and then a whisper, one word, translated loosely from the root language of Earth's ancient dialects, awakened. Fear is not something their kind expressed easily. They had consumed dozens of species, broken empires, reduced once glorious worlds to sterilized stone, but Earth was wrong. It was not chaotic. It was not primitive. It was quiet, and that terrified them more than any gunfire ever could. A world that fights is understandable, predictable. A world that goes silent, that turns off its lights, that stops responding, that is a world with secrets. That is a world remembering what it once had to do to itself. In the chamber, the woman watched as Unit 0 began to wake. His eyes did not open, but the space around him bent slightly, as if gravity had remembered his weight. The temperature dropped 3 degrees in under a second. Nearby alloys cracked. Systems trembled. He did not breathe, not yet, but the sensors monitoring his neural web began to spike. One pattern. One rhythm, the same heartbeat she had broadcast to the stars. It was not hers. It was the child's, and Unit 0, long buried beneath failed peace treaties and the guilt of nations, heard it, recognized it. And somewhere inside the human shell the machine had once worn as armor, something broke. Not physically, not electronically, emotionally, because Unit 0 had once loved. She remembered now, not all of it, but enough. Her son had died in the opening strike, not by accident, not collateral, targeted, because the invaders understood human pain better than human resistance. They knew how to provoke. What they did not know was that Earth had once done far worse to itself. That Earth had survived global famines, atmospheric collapse, civil wars fought with atomics and words sharpened like knives. that Earth had built Oblivion Protocol not for aliens but for itself, as punishment. As witness, as promise, she turned back as Unit Zero's chest rose for the first time in 300 years. No scream, no alarms, just breathe, but the walls flickered with fear. The chamber shook. Far below the crust, other vaults began to stir. Across the shattered grid, sleeper agents encoded into synthetic biology reactivated. Some were human, some were not. All were loyal only to one voice, and that voice now stood barefoot in the dark, remembering a name she could not say, with grief wrapped around her like armor. Earth did not send armies. Earth did not send ships. It sent her, and above, in the cold silence of space, the invaders began to argue. Their leaders disagreed. Their instruments could not explain the failures. Their maps, once glowing with human targets, now showed strange absences, places where sensors refused to penetrate, where light curved oddly, where sound returned garbled with human speech spoken in impossible tones. Oblivion Protocol was awake, but it was not alone. The woman who had no name was moving north, and with each step she took, Earth's past began to surface, not in rage, not in fire, but in memory. And memory, they would soon learn, is the one thing a dead world never forgets. They always believed Earth was a young world, unstable, passionate, too emotional to survive the cruelty of the galaxy, but they never asked what that emotion was built on. They never considered what it meant for a world to bury its pain beneath oceans and mountains and still remember the name of every child who had ever died in war. That was their first mistake, because now, as Earth held its breath and the buried protocols stirred, the soil began to whisper, not to the invaders, not to the stars, but to her, the woman who walked alone beneath the ruins of Delhi, beneath the ash-thick clouds that had once been a sky, who had no flag, no rank, no answers, but had become the center of the planet's final memory. And as she stepped into the underground transport tunnel, still half collapsed from the last tectonic shift, the walls shivered with names, names she did not know, and names she had not forgotten. Names that sounded like prayers. The tracks beneath her hummed, not with electricity, but with recognition. A magnetic pulse rose beneath her feet and stretched into the distance as if the tunnel itself had found its purpose again. As if the machines of a long-forgotten war were aligning with something ancient. And then came the sound, not metal, not wind, not footsteps, but wheels, rolling, groaning, shaking dust from overhead pipes as the magd. Rain arrived, driverless, half rusted, its windows black with age. It had not moved in 2 centuries. It did not ask why it was moving now. It just opened its doors and waited. She stepped inside without fear. As the train slipped into motion, the walls outside became light and blur. But inside, she saw them, not reflections, not ghosts, figures, human, faint, dozens of them. Some wore uniforms from wars Earth never officially fought. Some wore civilian clothes stained with ash and tears. All of them turned toward her as the train accelerated, and none of them blinked. They were not alive, but they were not gone. This, she realized, was not transportation. It was communion, a gathering of memory. The train was not built to move people. It was built to move grief. As the tunnel ended, she emerged into a vault unlike the others. This one had no lights. Just a single beam of sun that filtered down from a break in the surface 100 meters above, illuminating a stone slab with carvings so old even the AI embedded in her neural cortex paused to translate them. Ancient Sanskrit, a warning, a promise, a name, her own, not spoken in centuries, not recognized by any living nation, but carved into the bedrock of a world that had chosen her, because she was not just a survivor. She was Echo Origin, the human memory encoded into Earth's last defense. Not a leader, not a savior, a vessel. The Earth had not buried its weapons in vaults. It had buried them in people. The moment her bare foot touched the stone, the world changed. Orbiting satellites, both alien and human, lost contact. Gravity sensors spiked. A low frequency hum rose from the Himalayan tectonic plate and spread outward like thunder made from language. The invaders called it an anomaly. The AI on board their flagship called it a planetary awakening, but it was neither. It was recognition. Earth had finally opened its eyes, and it did not see them. It saw her. In the chamber below, a second vault began to open. This one did not contain a sleeper. It contained a signal, a weapon not made of metal or fire, but of voice. Human voice, layered across centuries, compiled from final words, battlefield cries, lullabies sung in bunkers, whispered promises made in shelters before the bombs fell. It was a signal encoded in emotion, not language, and when it activated, it did not speak. It wept. Across every frequency known to man or machine, the planet released a sob so deep, so vast, so ancient, that even the war-hardened minds aboard the enemy fleet hesitated. The flagship's commander demanded an explanation. He received none, just silence, then static, then a child's voice, laughing, then her voice speaking words she had never spoken aloud, not in this life. Not since the attack, but the system had remembered. It had remembered what she screamed the moment her son was vaporized in the sky over the Indian Ocean. 4 words, "I will remember everything." That was the trigger. That was the key. Every vault on the planet lit up. In the Amazon, trees twisted away from ancient steel pylons that reached skyward and began to glow. In Siberia, the permafrost cracked open to reveal monoliths of alloy and bone, each one humming with forbidden code. Off the coast of Greenland, an island rose not rock, but metal shaped like a broken hand reaching for the sky. These were not weapons in the conventional sense. They were memories, hardened into machines, waiting only for a name to speak their grief. And now that name had returned. Inside the vault, she collapsed to her knees, not from weakness, from overwhelm. She could feel them, all of them, the buried children of Earth's last war, rising to the surface, not as soldiers, but as truths. The invaders watched it all unfold and could not comprehend it. This was not military doctrine. This was not defense. This was something no strategy could match. A planet that had once destroyed itself so completely that even its peace was violent. Above, the fleet shifted, debates turned into orders. They would strike again, harder, erase this anomaly before it spread, before whatever Earth was doing became irreversible. But even as they readied their next wave, they missed something critical. Earth was no longer reacting, it was choosing which memories to awaken, which technologies to revive, which ancient oaths to keep, and above all who to speak through, because now the woman was standing again. Her voice echoed across the chamber, low and steady, though no air moved and no mic transmitted. She simply said, "You were right to fear us." And as the words traveled not through sound but through resonance, a machine beneath the Pacific opened one red eye and remembered how to end stars. The oceans had always hidden what the sky could not bear. In the quiet places where sunlight drowned and pressure crushed all arrogance, Earth had buried its oldest regrets, the kind no monument could hold, the kind no treaty could wash away. Not cities, not fleets, decisions, and under the Pacific, deep beyond the Mariana grave, a trench carved not by tectonics, but by choice. Something older than the war stirred as her voice passed through salt and silence. She had spoken 7 words, that was all. 7 words the sea remembered. 7 words the machines below had waited for since the last sunrise before the planet fell quiet. And in that moment, in that impossible deep, something blinked. It was not mechanical, not exactly, no gears, no metal in the traditional sense. The thing that opened its eye did not obey physics as the invaders knew it. It was synthetic will housed in organic alloy, shaped like nothing Earth ever built again. Because Earth had promised never to build it again, the thing beneath the waves was not a weapon. It was a decision engine. It had one function only, to weigh the death of one world against the suffering of another and choose. During the last Great War, Earth's leaders could not decide what must be done. So they built something that would. It had remained silent for 300 years, untouched, untested. Its key encoded not in code or command chain, but in the emotional resonance of a human who had lost everything and still chosen to speak. It required pain, pure pain, the kind even machines could not fake. And now it had heard it. It had felt her voice, and in the heart of the trench, thousands of miles beneath the storms, the thing Earth buried as a last resort stirred. Above, the fleets moved closer. 21 dreadnoughts, 9 siege-class orbitals, hundreds of dropships. The aliens no longer sought submission. They now feared infection that whatever had awakened in Earth might spread to other worlds. To their own, this was not about conquest anymore. This was about containment, sterilization. They would burn Earth down to ensure silence. But Earth would not burn again. The woman stood now in the Arctic vault. She had walked from the equator in silence, barefoot across steel and stone, and every step had reconnected her with places even history had forgotten. There were no armies beside her, no soldiers, but with each mile Earth itself moved with her. Dust became code, ruins became signal repeaters, ancient vines peeled back from glass domes that had not seen light since the fall of Oslo, and far below the ice, the northern counterweight began to activate not to launch, but to listen. To balance, because Earth was not just remembering. Earth was deciding again. She spoke no commands. She made no declarations. But inside her mind, the interface was no longer silent. The AI, once cold and procedural, now spoke in voices she recognized: her son's laughter, her sister's voice, her father's radio static. The system was not guiding her, it was translating her. She was not the weapon. She was the keyed tone through which the weapon understood grief, and that was the one thing the invaders could not predict. Their war doctrine knew fear, knew strength, knew tactics, but they had no model for a planet that grieved with intent. The flagship moved into low orbit. It broadcast once a warning: leave the vault, cease transmission, evacuation permitted. They did not want to strike again. They wanted this stopped. But she did not stop. She stepped into the final room of the Arctic node, where the cold air turned to vapor, and the floor was carved with ancient basalt not native to the north. The stone had been brought here long ago, from the Pacific Rim, as anchor, as balance, and now, with her presence, it glowed. At that exact moment, beneath the Mariana grave, the decision engine opened its second eye. This was the signal Earth had buried. 2 signals in perfect harmony: grief above, rage below. And then, Earth decided, the sea boiled, not on the surface, not yet, but from below. The water did not move, it bent. Gravity collapsed inward along a spiral of ancient pattern. Fish died instantly. Pressure equalized where it should not, and then One shape rose, not fast, not hostile. It rose like a cathedral, unfolding itself from the rock, as if the ocean had always worn it like skin. It was not a ship. It was not a creature. It was the final form of choice, taller than cities, older than civilization, and it opened its 1,000 eyes. From orbit, the fleet scanned and recoiled. Its signature did not match anything known. No heat, no EM signature, but every sensor, every instrument tuned to detect intent, returned one word, retribution. The commander gave the order, fire, all vessels, all at once, precision strikes, saturation. They would not allow this anomaly to rise further, and so the sky burned, but the earth did not, because earth had learned. The woman had seen this fire before. The systems she now stood within had absorbed it, recorded it, remembered every frequency, every chemical trace, every trajectory, and now they gave it back, not as weapons, but as mirrors. The fleet's own fire turned in midair, curved, reversed. The physics bent not through shield or field, but through grief, shaped logic. This was not defense, this was replay. Earth's final protocol was simple. What you do to us, you do to yourselves. And for the first time the fleet screamed. In the vault her eyes filled with tears. Not from pain, from recognition. The AI whispered that it was time, that the next step required confirmation, but she did not speak. She simply touched the basalt stone with her hand, and across the ocean the thing beneath the waves turned its head and sang. It was not music, not exactly. It was remembrance-given sound, frequencies laced with every scream ever heard from Earth's surface, the cries of Hiroshima, the silence of space capsules lost in orbit, the static of a dying planet's first and last message to the stars, and the invaders heard it all, not through comms, not through hull. Inside their minds the planet had spoken, and Earth's answer was not death. Earth's answer was echo. In orbit the commander tried to issue a retreat, but it was too late. They had declared war on Earth, and Earth had finally responded. They thought Earth would fall like any other world, burn at the edges, fracture in the middle, and collapse from within once its leaders were gone. They thought war was a straight line, apply pressure, break resistance, rewrite history, but Earth had never been a straight line. Earth was spirals and scars and recursive grief that turned pain into architecture. And now that grief had shaped not just in the machines or in the oceans, but in her. The woman who had nothing left to lose and still chose to walk forward. She did not command fleets, she did not wear rank, but she was being followed not by people, by the planet itself. Above her, the atmosphere boiled with broken code as satellites long believed dead flickered back to life, broadcasting ghost signals in languages abandoned 3 centuries ago. In orbit, the enemy fleet began to fragment. Not from attack, not yet, but from confusion. Their systems were crashing not from overload, but from recognition, because Earth's systems were not jamming them, they were joining them, patching themselves into enemy firewalls, mimicking command chains, echoing voices of their own officers. One dreadnought received an order from a voice it trusted. It obeyed. It turned its weapons inward. The last thing the crew saw before vaporization was the voice of their own admiral whispering, "You should not have come here." On the surface, the woman stood at the edge of what had once been Johannesburg. The land was glassed, twisted, a wound no technology had healed, but beneath it, Earth had grown something, not vines, not weapons. Something impossible, a living memory engine, roots of bioalloy and fossilized carbon designed to store intention, and as she stepped into the crater her presence activated the core. The earth beneath her feet breathed. Not air, not dust, but light, light shaped like remembrance. The entire continent trembled, and for the first time in centuries, Earth began to broadcast. Not signals of surrender, not distress. Earth transmitted witness. Footage, memories, pain, billions of lives, their final seconds. Every civilian burned, every child vaporized, every cry for mercy that went unanswered. Not just from this war, from all of them, from the first spear to the last orbital strike. The invaders did not know how to shut it off. They had no firewall for truth, and when they tried to blind their crew, to disconnect their minds from the stream, Earth's system injected it anyway through their own retinal links, through their own sleep cycles. It was no longer war. It was exposure, and the galaxy saw. Worlds far from Earth began to pause. Empires that had signed off on the invasion now received the transmission. Not filtered, not edited, raw, and in that rawness something ancient reawakened doubt. Fear not of Earth's weapons, but of Earth's memory, because a species that remembers everything it has lost does not fear extinction. It becomes extinction. She kept walking. Behind her, the Johannesburg engine began to rise, not like a rocket, like a root system shaking off centuries of ash and fire, and as it rose, it pulled up entire segments of the Earth's crust, not to launch them to reveal others. Hundreds, thousands, pods, machines, objects that had once been considered destroyed, but they had not been destroyed, they had been stored. Earth did not discard its broken children, it prepared them, reforged them in silence, buried them in memory, and now called them back. In orbit, the fleet was unraveling, ship by ship, not from firepower, from fracture, the kind that begins in the mind, officers questioning each other's orders. Soldiers seeing images they could not unsee. Some tried to flee. Their engines failed. Others tried to fight. Their weapons turned to glass, and the flagship, the great command vessel, finally saw it. A shadow rising through the clouds, no heat signature, no propulsion, just presence. It was the Johannesburg core, but it had changed, no longer a seed, now a signal platform, not meant to kill, meant to invite. To reveal, it did not fire, it spoke, and its voice was hers. 7 words, spoken in the same tone she had used when she saw her son die. This is not our first extinction. The enemy froze, not just in orbit. Across the stars, because they had always known Earth was violent, always feared it. But this was worse. This was survival as ritual. Earth had died before, many times. It had been burned, bombed, shattered. And every time it chose to come back. That kind of species does not surrender. That kind of species does not forget. That kind of species becomes a mirror, and the galaxy was now staring into its own reflection. She stepped onto the Johannesburg platform and looked skyward. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply waited, waited for the galaxy to answer. And in the silence, Earth asked its final question. Are you ready to die as many times as we have? In every corner of the sky where the enemy once moved freely, there was now hesitation. No commands, no counterattack. Just a heavy planetary silence that bent around the woman's voice like gravity. She did not repeat her question. She did not need to. Those 7 words had reached beyond orbit, beyond the battlefield. They had entered the bloodstream of an empire that had never known fear. And now, fear was the only language they understood. Some ships shut down without warning. Entire carrier clusters went dark as their AI cores imploded from recursive feedback loops, not from damage, but from shame. The Johannesburg platform did not weaponize fire. It weaponized truth, and no system, no soldier, no command hierarchy could override what they now saw. A world that had died 100 times and still walked forward. A world that had buried its children and risen carrying only their names. She stood alone, but the ground beneath her was alive. Every step she took now reactivated Earth's forgotten limbs systems once feared, once sealed, not because they were dangerous, but because they were final. These were not weapons of conquest, these were weapons of reflection, devices designed to force any attacker to witness their own history through Earth's eyes. They did not fire missiles, they amplified consequence. One ship tried to escape the orbit net, its engines screaming against Earth's magnetic choke. But the moment it reached beyond the upper thermosphere, it was pulled back, not by force, by memory loops keyed to its own invasion logs. They had uploaded their war plans. Earth gave them back, moment by moment, life by life, reverse, written in the blood of those they killed. The crew inside collapsed not from heat or impact, but from what they saw, their own hands, killing children they never knew, in places they had never visited but had destroyed anyway. This was not justice. This was reckoning, and it was only beginning. Across the planet, ancient relay towers unfurled, some from mountaintops, some from ocean floors, one even from the hollow shell of a dead moon tethered to Earth's core with synthetic grav lines. These towers pulsed not with light, but with encoded grief. Every one of them transmitted a different story: a mother who died shielding her son, a medic who held the hand of a stranger until the fire came, a refugee who sang as her city fell. These were not military records. They were witness accounts, pulled from Earth's last breath and sent outward as signal, not for enemies, for the galaxy. The message was simple: we are still here and we remember everything. Somewhere in the outer systems, allied worlds began to disconnect, quietly, cowardly. They severed ties to the invading fleet, deleted call logs, purged diplomatic chains. They could not be associated now. Not with this, not with the knowledge that Earth did not fall, had never truly fallen, and that everything they believed about this war had been a lie. The Central Empire, the architects of the invasion, sent one final encrypted message to their flagship still in Earth's orbit. It contained a single directive: do not return, and still the woman did not move, because Earth was not yet finished. She stood now at the edge of what had once been Central Asia, where the sky was too wide to hide in, and the land was cracked from centuries of collapse. She walked into the ruins of an old city, untouched since the first fall, not from battle, but from apathy. It had been left to die, and now in its heart Earth had built something new, not a fortress. A listener, a massive skeletal dome of black stone and carbon wire, designed not to broadcast but to receive. She stepped inside, and the structure recognized her, her heartbeat, her cadence, her silence. And deep below, the last vault of Earth's oldest codebase awoke. It was not a weapon. It was Earth's answer to its own past, a sentient recording, a mirror of all human error, trained not to punish, but to hold accountable. It asked her a question now in her own voice: do you want vengeance? She could have said yes. The fleet was broken, the sky belonged to Earth. The systems were in her hands, but she did not speak. She stepped to the center of the dome, where thousands of memory shards hung in the air every war, every betrayal, every failure humanity had endured. Her son's face among them, her own life, split into 1,000 grief-shaped angles. And as she raised her hand, the shards began to collapse inward, not into a weapon, into a single directive: Let them see what we have become. In orbit, the last dreadnought received a final signal. Not an attack, an invitation, one window, one moment. The woman was transmitting from Earth's heart. No encryption, no defenses, just her. They could take the shot, kill her, end this before it grew. But every system officer on that bridge saw the truth now. The risk was not her. It was Earth's memory of what she had become. If they killed her, Earth would not burn. Earth would awaken completely. So they did nothing. They drifted, silent, adrift in guilt they could not program away. She closed her eyes. The ground below her dimmed, the atmosphere calmed. Earth breathed in, and for the first time since the invasion began, Earth breathed out. Not fire, not fury, hope. A pulse rippled through space, a transmission quiet, unarmed, unfiltered. It did not demand, it did not threaten. It simply told the truth of what happened here, and it asked the stars, is this what you wanted? The galaxy had seen wars before. It had witnessed empires rise in smoke and collapse in silence. It had counted bodies in the trillions and called them acceptable loss. But never, not once, had it been forced to watch. Earth changed that. Earth made them watch, made them feel. No filters, no ceremony, just raw, unhealed memory sent screaming into every receiver from the core systems to the cold edges of exile space. The woman had not broadcast herself. She had broadcast what they did. And now entire civilizations looked into that mirror and saw their own reflection dripping with ash. Some tried to deny it. Some tried to spin it. Others simply went quiet. Entire news grids went black, not because of censorship, because no one knew what to say, and yet she remained unmoved, unnamed, and unarmed. She had not become a symbol. She had become a consequence. The dreadnought above Earth powered down. Its crew filed into their memory pods not to sleep, not to flee to confess. Their logs became open record, the horrors they justified, the orders they followed, the screams they filtered out. One commander, before sealing himself in, whispered to the bridge, "We were never the heroes." Then silence, no escape pod launched, no message sent home. The ship became a tomb. The tomb became a warning. Back on Earth, the woman walked alone. She passed through cities swallowed by vines, deserts that sang when the wind hit broken glass, oceans that remembered shapes that no longer lived. But as she moved, the world changed around her, not rebuilt, remembered. Places long thought erased began to return, not physically, but through emergence. A school that had burned decades ago reappeared in outline as dust patterns in the wind. A voice that once called roll in a ruined courtyard echoed without source. Memory was rewriting the landscape, not as fantasy, as testimony, and still she walked. The silence around her deepened, not in absence, but in reverence. Even the wind seemed careful now. The ground no longer cracked underfoot. It held her because Earth was listening, not just to her steps, to her restraint. She had not ordered retribution. She had not demanded blood. She had been given the keys to planetary vengeance and instead had chosen to make them watch. And somewhere deep in the void, something older than Earth noticed. It was not part of the invading empire. It did not hold borders, it did not wear names, but it had been watching this galaxy for ages, indifferent, unmoved, until now, until it saw a species refuse to die the way they were told, until it saw a woman who had lost everything choose to become a mirror instead of a blade. It sent a single fragment of thought, not words, not signal recognition. Far above Earth, in a region of space long thought empty, stars flickered. One blinked out, then returned, not in light, but in structure. A ring, a listening structure, built not by machines, by time. Something had begun to listen back. Something that had buried its own history so deep it forgot how to feel. and now Earth had made it feel again. Back on the surface, the woman reached the remains of Geneva, once a city of treaties, later a crater of betrayals. Now it shimmered, not with rebuilding, with alignment. Stones rearranged themselves. Dust rose in patterns. She did not command it. Earth responded to her presence, not as leader, as witness. In the center of the ruin, the last diplomatic table reformed, scorched, cracked, but whole. She sat alone, no armies, no allies, no audience, and still the galaxy watched. From orbit, new ships began to arrive, but not enemy craft, not reinforcements, observers, small, unarmed. Some from species who had once looked away when Earth was burned. Some from species that had never heard of Earth until now, but all of them had come for one reason: to listen, because the story had changed. Earth was no longer a backwater world with too much emotion and too many scars. Earth had become a verdict, one passed not in fire but in silence. The woman lifted her eyes. She spoke once. Her voice reached every ship, every outpost, every frightened ambassador hiding behind encrypted glass. You declared war on a planet that forgets nothing. Tell me, what will you remember of yourselves? And with that, Earth fell silent again. But this time, the silence did not end anything, it began something. The silence that followed her question did not fade, it deepened, it filled the space between ships, seeped into the halls of power, crept into the lungs of emperors and advisors who once spoke of conquest like weather. This was not absence of sound, it was the presence of realization. Earth had not retaliated, Earth had revealed, and now the galaxy understood what it had tried so hard to forget, that a world which refuses to die cannot be conquered, only reckoned with. Messages flooded the void, not to Earth, but to each other. Alliances trembled. Old enemies of the invading empire began to reach for forgotten channels, not with demands, but with questions. If Earth had survived that, then what else had the galaxy been wrong about? Above Earth, the sky had become a parliament of quiet machines, observation vessels, cultural historians. Even rogue AI, once exiled for curiosity, returned to orbit, their cores humming low with awe. The woman said nothing more. She did not need to. Earth's memory still played, looping through the stars, unfiltered and alive. There was no schedule, no control panel. The stories surfaced in rhythms Earth alone understood: a boy whispering to a dying sibling in a shelter that collapsed, a soldier refusing to abandon a village even as the sky tore open, a nurse who stitched strangers together with her own thread until the fires took her. These were not just records, they were testaments, and the galaxy was not watching Earth anymore. It was listening to it. On distant worlds, protests ignited, not against Earth, against those who had lied, against those who had called it primitive, who had described the invasion as necessary, who had signed off on extermination with the same breath they used to order lunch. Youth movements that had never seen war now wore Earth's silence like armor. Artists abandoned commissions to paint what they saw in the memory streams. Musicians stopped performing until their halls agreed to broadcast Earth's witness accounts. Earth had not won a war, it had rewired an era. And in the center of it all, the woman still seated in the ruins of Geneva watched the sun rise. It was not a victory, it was not healing, but it was another day, and on Earth that had always meant something. The memory engine beneath her flickered with new light now. It was no longer just playback, it was response. Other survivors, those scattered across mountain vaults, underwater cities, orbital exile cradles, were beginning to connect. Not to her, to each other. They saw what she had done, how she had refused to answer violence with fire, how she had opened the wound instead of covering it, how she had trusted that if the galaxy saw them, it might not look away again. And some of them began to rise from the bunkers and ashes, from hydro farms built in the wreckage of towers, from silos filled with seed codes and last letters. They emerged not as soldiers, as reminders. They were not coming to take back territory. They were coming to tell stories, the kind no machine could erase, the kind no empire could overwrite. Every survivor was now a carrier of memory, and Earth itself was amplifying them, giving shape to their silence. Forests glowed when they entered, oceans calmed, winds shifted, as if the planet was realigning around their presence. Meanwhile, across the stars, the architects of war, the high throne, the mineral lords, the technocrat guilds tried to formulate responses. They called emergency councils. They drafted public statements. But every time they tried to speak, their words collapsed under the weight of what Earth had already said. Their language had no grammar for grief without conquest, no syntax for resistance without violence. Earth had spoken in silence, and now the galaxy understood that silence more clearly than it ever understood orders or threats. A transmission came, not from Earth, from an empire long thought extinct, a small, crystalline signal, fractal in its code, ancient in its tone. It requested audience not with Earth's governments, but with her, the woman, the silent one, the one who carried her child's memory like a flame that could not be extinguished. The empire did not demand, it did not offer, it simply asked, "Will you teach us how to remember?" And the stars shifted, not visibly, not in motion, but in intention, a turning, a soft lean, as if the very fabric of the galactic structure now bent toward a new axis not of power, but of reckoning. All because a woman had chosen not to scream, but to stand, not to retaliate, but to remember, not to collapse, but to make them see. She stood up from the table. Her voice reached the stars again, this time only 3 words. "Then come listen." They came quietly. No banners, no guards, no fleets escorting them like emissaries of some ancient power. They came in singles and pairs, some in ships made of polished stone, others in living vessels that whispered lullabies to space itself. They did not arrive in triumph, they arrived in shame, in awe, in something close to reverence, because the invitation had not been an offer. It had been a moment, a chance to be something other than what they had become. The first to land were the exarchs of Violia, a species once known for burning the archives of every world they conquered, believing that memory was weakness. Now they stepped down with exposed cores, their neural filaments raw, unshielded, as a gesture of vulnerability. Behind them came the children of Sciavath, a crystalline race that had once auctioned Earth's fate in a sealed council and called it diplomacy. They landed in silence, and finally, hours later, came the Oroshi, the long-lived culture that had sold Earth's orbital rights to the Empire before the first missile fell. Their elder stepped down with a broken translation device clutched in his trembling fingers and spoke in ancient Earth dialect, learned not from machines but from Earth's own memory stream. "I was wrong." He bowed, not low all the way. His forehead touched the scorched soil. The woman stood before them, still unnamed, still alone. She did not nod, did not raise her voice. Instead, she turned and began walking. Across the bones of Geneva, through corridors lined with re-emergent memory fields, toward the path the world had opened behind her. The visitors followed. No one spoke, no one dared, because what Earth had built here, through her silence, was not a city. It was a pilgrimage. Every step taken on this land carried the weight of names never spoken again, of moments erased by fire, now rising like echoes stitched into stone. The path did not lead to a monument. It led to a single room, circular and bare, except for the floor, which pulsed gently with light, not from power, but from memory. She stopped at its edge. Her hand moved once across the air, and the floor responded not with projection, not with weaponry, but with presence. The exarchs flinched first. Even with no screens or audio, they saw. The first image, a woman, young, desperate, crouched in the ruins of a metro station, clutching her child's body as gas seeped through the walls. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her face shook with the knowledge that no one was coming, not rescue, not hope, not even the enemy, because the enemy had already moved on. Her death had not even been counted. It had simply been assumed. Then the room shifted. Another image, a father dragging solar panels over the remains of a collapsed shelter, wrapping his bleeding hands in the fabric of a school uniform to keep working. Not to escape, just to keep the lights on so his children would not be afraid when the sun fell. They died anyway. He kept walking. Another, a dog, its legs mangled, crawling beside the body of its owner, refusing to leave, barking once every hour into the static of a dead radio tower. It never knew the war had ended. It only knew loyalty. One by one, the visitors fell to their knees, not because of the horror, because Earth had not destroyed them for it. She watched, not cold, not angry, just present. As the Oroshi, Elder finally sobbed, not for Earth, but for his own blindness. He looked at her, shaking, and asked the only thing he could through a cracked voice, "Why did you let us live?" Her answer was the floor. It changed again. This time it showed them, the invaders, the admirals and ambassadors, the scientists who designed sterilization arrays, the field officers who made jokes as cities collapsed, the political architects who sanitized genocide with the word containment. But Earth did not show their deaths. It showed them before, one brushing a daughter's hair, another building a garden with his spouse, a third laughing at a poem written by their sibling. They were not evil. They were not monsters. They were people who chose comfort over conscience, who forgot that someone else always pays for indifference, and Earth in its infinite, brutal memory refused to erase their humanity. Even when they had tried to erase ours, that was the answer. The woman never spoke it. She just showed them. The room dimmed, not off, just quiet, letting the echoes settle into bone, letting them decide what to do with it. She left them there, kneeling in their knowledge, and walked again, this time toward the outer edge of the memory field, where the ruins became quiet again, untouched, as if Earth was waiting. Behind her, one of the younger diplomats stood, a child, really barely old enough to be considered an envoy by his species. He asked the question all the others were too afraid to voice: "What happens next?" She turned, and for the first time since the war ended, she spoke directly. Her voice was steady, not loud, but it carried through every orbit. "Now you carry it." That was all, and somehow it was more than enough. Because they understood, this was not Earth's burden anymore. The shame, the cost, the grief, it did not end here. It would travel. It would live in every ship that had witnessed the silence, in every treaty now written with a hand that had touched these ashes. It would show up in policy, in poetry, in pauses between arguments, in architecture designed not to dominate, but to remember. Earth would not make them rebuild it. Earth had already begun to rebuild itself. But they would remember what they saw here, and what they saw was not vengeance, not ruin, but dignity forged in extinction's shadow, By nightfall, the visitors began to leave. No ceremonies, no farewells. Some did not speak at all. They simply left behind gifts not of wealth, but of apology, a seed strain that could regrow oxygen in low-atmosphere wastelands, a healing crystal carved from regret, humming with apology in 20 frequencies. A sculpture made from metals mined during the war, melted and reformed into the shape of an open hand. The woman never touched them. Earth accepted them in its own way, absorbing, adapting, storing. But what mattered most were not the offerings. It was the eyes of those who gave them. None of them left the way they arrived. The Oroshi elder turned before stepping onto his ship. He whispered almost to himself, "Let the stars remember this." And the stars did. Satellites still aligned to orbital weapon patterns now redirected toward memory archives. Not just Earth's, the galaxies. A unified space, no center, no throne, no rulers. Just record, just truth. Earth's silence had become the foundation for the most honest network the stars had ever known. A place where no one could bury what they had done. And still the woman walked. Into the mountains now, where ice met glass and old fire lines still scarred the rock. Here, Earth was quiet again, not in mourning, in rest. She sat beneath an overhang carved by winds older than language and reached into her pocket. She pulled out the last object. No one had seen a small, smooth stone, blackened by heat, worn down by tears. It was not from the war, it was from before, a gift from her son. He had found it near the ocean and said it looked like a piece of the sky. She placed it on the ground, and Earth responded. A tree began to grow. Not with speed, not with drama, just truth, a seed that had been waiting, a bloom that meant something. Behind her, a breeze carried voices from the foothills, children's voices, survivors' children. The next ones, the ones who would carry Earth forward not with hatred, but with memory shaped into caution. They would inherit a planet that never forgot what was done to it, and because of that, they would not repeat it. The woman did not turn. She simply closed her eyes, and for the first time since they killed her son, since they burned her world, since they left her with nothing but silence, she slept. The stars moved on. That was their nature. Empires rose, fell, negotiated, changed their names, rewrote their constitutions to sound less cruel. But Earth remembered, and not in bitterness, not in the old way of revenge. It remembered because forgetting had cost too much. Entire cities turned to shadows, entire bloodlines reduced to names etched in dust. And so, as the galaxy evolved and history tried to heal, Earth chose not to participate in the forgetting. It stayed silent, yes, but that silence had a pulse now, a rhythm the universe began to measure itself against. Where other planets traded in power and resource, Earth traded in memory. That became its currency. Its influence, its truth. The woman, her name never spoken, her face now etched into carvings across 12 systems, still walked the surface. She had not aged in the way others understood. Earth had slowed her. Not with medicine, not with augmentation, but with something deeper. The planet had folded its own rhythm around her grief and let her live at the speed of healing. It took years not for her to recover, but for the galaxy to understand that she was not a leader, not a figurehead, not a negotiator. She was a consequence, a result of what happens when you break something that loved too deeply and expect it to vanish. Visitors still came, fewer now, not diplomats but pilgrims, the curious, the honest, children of those who once launched the invasion, asking not for forgiveness but for understanding, and Earth received them without judgment. It showed them what it had shown the first one's memory, pain, love burned into glass and soil and bone. But it added something new now. For each visitor who came with open eyes, Earth revealed one new memory, a moment of laughter, of birth, of ordinary beauty from before the war, because Earth was not just a grave, it was a witness, and what it had witnessed was not only death. It had once lived wildly, brilliantly, imperfectly, and it wanted the stars to know what it had lost. The tree she had planted grew tall. By the 10th year after the silence began, it had become the tallest structure on the continent. Its roots ran deep into fault lines filled with the bones of cities. Its leaves shimmered with bioluminescence, coded by Earth's memory engine to respond to proximity. When someone approached with guilt, it turned blue. When they came with questions, green. And when they came with hope, real, trembling, frightened hope, it turned gold. By the 30th year, it was visible from orbit, and ships rerouted just to pass by it in silence. And still she watched it. She no longer lived in the ruins of Geneva. That place had been left to rest as it should have been. Now she lived on a high ridge, where Earth had built her no palace, no chamber, just a shelter, small, round, made from the bones of fallen satellites and the glass of melted towers. Here she could see the tree, and when the wind shifted just right, she could hear it speak not in words, but in the rustle of time, in the quiet chorus of all that remained. The galaxy tried, in its own way, to integrate Earth's memory into its laws. New protocols forbade unprovoked planetary invasion. Whole treaties were built around the principles of acknowledgement, not just non-aggression. Education systems now included required viewings of Earth's open archives. But none of it changed the simple truth. They had done it, and she had not stopped them. She had made them see. One day, many years later, a child arrived. She was not part of a delegation. She had not been sent by any government. She had made the journey on a repurposed medical craft stolen from a junkyard. No escort, no approval. Just the fierce, irrational pull that Earth's silence had begun to imprint on certain minds, especially the young. When she reached the ridge where the woman lived, she did not ask permission to approach. She simply stood there, trembling, holding something in both hands. The woman opened her door, looked down, and for the first time in decades, she smiled. The girl was holding a flower, an earth flower, one that had not existed since the war. She had grown it from seed, hidden away in an old genetic archive, once looted by the Empire, and then discarded. She had found the sequence, reconstructed it, tended it for years, and brought it back, not as tribute, not as offering, as return. The woman knelt, took the flower, planted it beside her son's stone. No words were spoken, but Earth heard, and something changed. For the first time since the war, the stars above Earth shifted, not physically, but intentionally. Entire constellations began to reroute their travel maps through Sol's system, no longer for strategic reasons, but for pilgrimage. Earth was no longer a ruin. It was now a site of memory, the kind that civilization is built on, not conquered over, and deep below the surface, where once the warheads had burned tunnels into the crust, something stirred. Not danger, not vengeance, life. Flora long dormant, fauna once assumed extinct began to return, slowly, respectfully, as if waiting for permission. Earth gave it. It had waited long enough. It would always carry the scars, but it had decided without announcement, without celebration, to live again. And the woman, old now, eyes full of decades no one should have had to endure, sat by the flower her son would have loved, beside the tree he had inspired, beneath the sky that had once burned her world, and finally asked the question that had lived in her for all those years. Is it enough? She did not ask the stars. She asked Earth, and Earth answered, not in voice, in wind, in color, in a sudden bloom of golden leaves on a branch that had never turned before. Yes, it was enough, because the dead had been remembered. The crimes had been exposed, the silence had become a language, and in that language, across light, years and generations, across broken faith and scarred history, a single truth had emerged: you can kill a world, but you cannot kill its witness. She closed her eyes for the last time, and the tree beside her bloomed brighter. Ships passing overhead dimmed their engines. And somewhere, in a child's classroom on a world that had once voted for Earth's destruction, a teacher paused mid-lesson as her students looked out the window and saw the golden flare on a distant blue world. They did not ask what it meant. They knew